All right, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Just for a second. Picture the absolute dead of night.
Total darkness.
It's January 15th, 1902. We are deep, deep in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula. And the silence is just heavy. It's that suffocating, cold silence you only get in the desert right before dawn.
And we are standing outside the walls of Riyadh. Now, you need to forget everything you think you know about Riyadh today. Forget the skyscrapers, the superhighways, all of it.
Oh yeah, this is not that Riyadh.
This Riyadh is a fortress. It is a mud brick citadel ringed by these high, imposing walls, and it is locked down tight for the night.
Exactly. And crouching in the shadows, probably shivering because, desert nights are brutally cold, is this small group of men. 40 of them. That's it, just 40.
It's nothing. It's a raiding party.
And leading them is this young guy. He's tall, broad-shouldered. He's only in his 20s. His name is Abdulaziz bin Rahman Al Saud. But history is going to know him as Ibn Saud.
And he is staring up at those walls.
Staring up at those walls, knowing that if he makes a single wrong move, if a dog barks, if a guard just happens to glance down at the wrong moment, he's dead. And not just him. His entire family's dream, their entire future, it dies right there with him.
It really is an unbelievable setup.
Yeah.
It feels like it's pulled from a movie script. By any conventional military logic, what they're attempting is, well, it's just pure insanity.
It's a suicide mission.
Totally. They aren't an army. Like you said, they're a raiding party.
Right.
And Ibn Saud, at this point, he's in exile. He has no kingdom, no treasury. He has barely any followers to his name. He is betting absolutely everything on this one single night.
And the plan itself, it's not exactly a sophisticated military operation. It feels like something a screenwriter would come up with because it's so audacious. They didn't have siege engines. They didn't have cannons. They had palm trees?
That's right. It's almost comical if it wasn't so deadly serious. They had cut down palm trunks from a nearby oasis to use as, crude ladders.
So leaning them against the wall.
Just tilting them up against these sheer clay walls in the pitch black. And just imagine the physical tension of that. You're climbing a shaky, splintery palm trunk, hand over hand, trying not to let your sword scrape against the wall and make a sound.
A sound that would get you all killed.
Right. Knowing that the Rashidi governor, a man named Abdul, is asleep inside that fortress just a few hundred yards away.
So they get over the wall, but they don't attack right away. This is the part that it stresses me out just reading about it. They find a house near the governor's fortress, they infiltrate it, and they just wait.
For hours. They effectively take the family hostage, but quietly. They sit there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the city starting to wake up. The smell of coffee brewing, they're just waiting for their moment.
Because they knew his routine.
They knew Abdul's routine perfectly. He would leave the fortress at dawn to go and inspect his horses. He was a man of habit, and they were counting on that.
And sure enough, just as the sun cracks the horizon, the fortress gates creak open. Abdul steps out, and all hell breaks loose.
Absolute total chaos. Ibn Saud and his men, his cousins, they just burst out of the house. They're shouting, the clash of swords. It's not a battle, it's a brawl. It's brutal, close quarters fighting in the dust.
And his cousin, right, Abdullah bin Jalui.
Yes, he chases the governor back towards the fortress gate as Abdul tries to retreat, and he cuts him down right there in the entryway.
Just like that. The governor is dead. The garrison inside loses its nerve. They surrender. The city falls. And with that one desperate, bloody morning, everything changes.
That is the spark. That raid is the singular moment that ignites the flame of what becomes the third Saudi state. It's the dramatic return of the Al Saud family from the political wilderness.
It's an incredible story, but what's really fascinating to me, and I think to you as well, isn't just the action movie part of it. It's what happens next.
Exactly. Because conquering a city with 40 men is one thing. It's legendary stuff. But building a nation state where there wasn't one before, from scratch, that is an entirely different skill set.
And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and understand how this guy, this tribal raider with 40 men and a palm tree for a ladder, transforms into the monarch sitting on the deck of a U.S. warship meeting with President Franklin D. Roosevelt.
It's an incredible arc.
How does he go from a refugee in Kuwait to the founder of a global energy superpower?
It's a journey from really the medieval world to the modern world, all within a single lifetime. And the central theme, the thing you have to keep in your head to understand him, is balance.
Balance between what?
Ibn Saud was a master of balancing ancient tribal traditions, the old ways of raiding and honor, with ruthless modern 20th century geopolitics. He knew when to use the sword, But crucially, he also knew when to put it away and sign a contract.
Well, let's rewind a bit from that raid, because to really get why it was such a monumental gamble, we have to understand just how low the Al Saud family had fallen. You said they were exiles. How did they lose Riyadh to begin with?
The Al Saud family wasn't new to this game, not at all. They had been a dominant power in Central Arabia for, over 130 years. There was a first Saudi state, then a second Saudi state. But politics in Arabia at that time was incredibly volatile. Think of it like a constant series of shifting alliances.
A tough neighborhood.
The toughest. And by the time Ibn Saud is a teenager, around 1891, the second state is completely collapsing. Their chief rivals, the Rashidi dynasty, who were based in the north, inhale.
And they had powerful friends.
They did. They were backed by the Ottoman Empire. And this Ottoman-Rashidi alliance just crushed the Al Saud. They effectively wiped them off the map, politically speaking.
So at 15 years old, Ibn Saud isn't some prince living in a palace. He is on the run.
He is a refugee. And I really want to emphasize what that exile looked like. This wasn't, a comfortable political asylum in London or Paris.
No five-star hotels.
No. In 1891, the family flees Riyadh and goes straight into the desert. They take refuge with the Al-Murra, a Bedouin tribe deep in the Rub al-Khali.
The empty quarter. The name alone tells you everything.
It's one of the harshest desert environments on the entire planet. We're talking endless sand dunes, unimaginable heat, almost no water. And Ibn Saud spent his formative teenage years there, living in a tent, moving with the camel herds, eating dates and camel milk.
So this is where he learns to be tough.
This period stripped away any softness he might have had. It connected him viscerally to the Bedouin way of life, to their honor codes, their dialects, their poetry. He learned their incredible resilience because he had to. It was survival.
And after desert, they move around a bit, right? Qatar, Bahrain, and then they finally land in Kuwait.
Yes, and Kuwait is the next phase of his education.
Yeah.
If the desert was his boot camp, you could say Kuwait was his.
Yeah.
Well, his grad school in statecraft.
How so?
Because in Kuwait, the ruler was Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah, also known as Mubarak the Great. And he was a master politician, a real operator. Ibn Saud spent countless hours just sitting in Mubarak's Machiavelli's daily court and just watching.
Just absorbing it all.
Absorbing everything. He watched how Mubarak handled tribal disputes, how he played the Ottomans against the British, how he dealt with foreign merchants and diplomats. It was a masterclass in pragmatism and power politics.
But I read that Ibn Saud's father, Abdul Rahman, he hated this. He was this very pious, very religious guy, and he did not approve of Mubarak at all.
That's a key tension in Ibn Saud's life, right there. You have his father, Abdul Rahman, who represented the strict, uncompromising Wahhabi faith, the religious conscience. He saw Mubarak's court as worldly, maybe even a bit immoral and corrupt.
But Ibn Saud saw something else.
Ibn Saud saw the utility of it. He realized that to rule effectively, you couldn't just pray and be pious. You had to negotiate. You had to make deals. You had to be pragmatic. He learned you could be a devout man in your heart, but a shrewd politician in the Majlis.
So he's got the toughness from the desert. He's got the political savvy from Kuwait. But who actually lights the fire under him? Who pushes him to go back and risk everything to take Riyadh? Because honestly, staying in Kuwait seems a lot safer.
This is where we have to talk about one of the most important and often overlooked figures in Saudi history. His paternal aunt, Jawara bint Faisal.
Tell me about her, because in a lot of these histories, women tend to be in the background, but she seems to be front and center.
She was a force of nature. From all accounts, she was the keeper of the family's honor. Yeah. While some of the men were, resigned to their fate in exile, feeling defeated, Jawara was the fire. She had this terrifying amount of pride in the Al Saud lineage, and she wouldn't let it die.
So what was she telling him? What was her message?
She was essentially challenging his manhood, his destiny. She would sit with him and recount the glorious stories of their ancestors of the first and second states. She would say things like, "Are you going to be content living on the charity of others? Or are you going to reclaim what is rightfully yours?"
Wow.
She instilled this sense of inevitability in him. She made him believe that it wasn't a choice. It was his duty, his destiny.
That's incredibly powerful. It's like she was the architect of his ambition.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just a youthful influence. Even after he became king, he visited her almost every single day until she died in 1930. She was his most trusted advisor, his confidant.
And while we're on the subject of the powerful women who shaped him, we can't forget his sister, Nora.
No, you can't. They were incredibly close. She was just a year older than him. And in a society where men's names and lineage usually dominate everything, Ibn Saud's personal battle cry, his public boast when he was charging into combat, was Ana Aku Nora.
Which means,
I am the brother of Nora. That tells you everything you need to know about the respect and love he had for her. Her name was his source of pride.
so fueled by his aunt, backed by his sister, armed with the lessons of the desert and Kuwait, he takes Riyadh. We've covered that incredible raid. But taking one city doesn't make a kingdom. He's surrounded by enemies. How does he actually expand from there?
It was a long, hard grind. That's the only way to describe it.
Yeah.
From 1902 right up until the 1920s, it's just constant, low-level warfare, a series of raids and counter-raids. He's fighting the Rashidis in the north, he's fighting Ottoman proxies, he's trying to bring other tribes into his fold.
So it's a slow process.
Very slow.
Yeah.
And he ran into a fundamental problem with his army. The traditional Bedouin tribal levy, the way wars had been fought for centuries, it just wasn't built for state building.
Why not? I mean, they were legendary fighters, right?
They were incredible individual fighters, fearless.
Mm-hmm.
But they were unreliable as soldiers in a long-term campaign. Their loyalty was to their sheikh, to their tribe, not to some abstract idea of a state.
So if things got boring.
Or if it was time to harvest the dates, they went home. If they captured enough loot from a raid, they considered the job done and they went home. You can't conquer a continent with an army that clocks out whenever they feel like it.
So he needs a standing army, a professional army. But he doesn't have the money to pay mercenaries.
Exactly. And this is where we see Ibn Saud's real genius, and also where he creates his most dangerous weapon. Enter the Ikhwan,
The Brotherhood.
the Brotherhood. Around 1912, he starts this movement. And it's so much more than just a military force.
It's not just about fighting.
No, it was a massive piece of social engineering. Ibn Saud realized he needed to fundamentally break the old tribal cycle of loyalty. So he established these agricultural colonies called shar, or settlements.
And what was the pitch?
He went to the nomadic Bedouin and said, "Stop wandering. This life of constant movement is un-Islamic. Settle down here in these villages. I will give you land, I will give you wells, I will give you religious teachers, farm the land, and dedicate your lives to the pure, strict worship of God."
Wait a minute. He took nomads, people whose culture had been defined by roaming for thousands of years, and told them to become farmers. That sounds like an incredibly hard sell.
It was. It went against everything they knew. But he offered them something more powerful than tradition. Salvation. And a new identity.
A religious identity.
Precisely. He replaced their old identity. I am from the Anaza tribe, or I am from the Muter tribe, with a new unifying identity. I am an Ikhwan. I am a soldier of God. He convinced them that loyalty to him as their imam was a religious duty, and if they died fighting for him, they were martyrs who would go straight to paradise.
That is a terrifyingly effective tool. You're taking guys who are already some of the toughest fighters on earth, and you're giving them a cause they are willing to die for, no questions asked.
It weaponized their faith. The Ikhwan became his shock troops. They were utterly fearless. They were fanatical. They would charge machine guns armed only with swords, believing they were invincible. They terrified every one of their enemies.
And with this new force, he's finally able to push out of the central desert, the Nejd.
Yes. And by 1924, he's ready for the big move, the prize jewel, the conquest of the Hejaz.
Which is the western coastal region. We're talking about Mecca, Medina, the port city of Jeddah.
This is the real turning point. Before this, he's a powerful desert chieftain, maybe a king of Central Arabia. But if he takes the Hejaz, he becomes something else entirely. He becomes the custodian of the holy cities. He enters the global stage.
And the Hejaz was ruled by a different dynasty.
It was ruled by the Hashemites, led by Sharif Hussein bin Ali. And his family had held power there for 700 years. They were the traditional guardians of the holy places.
And the Ikhwan just rolled over them.
Pretty much. The Hashemite forces were no match for the religious fervor of the Ikhwan. They captured Mecca in 1924. Sharif Hussein abdicated and fled. Suddenly, Ibn Saud is ruling two completely different worlds.
You've got the Nejd.
Rugged, tribal, insular, fanatically religious.
And now you've got the Hejaz.
Cosmopolitan, full of pilgrims from all over the world, merchants, foreign diplomats, a much more moderate version of Islam.
That sounds like a management nightmare. How do you possibly govern those two very different places with the same set of laws?
You don't. And this shows his pragmatism again. For years, he actually ran them as two separate countries in a personal union. He's the king of Hejaz and the sultan, later king, of Nejd, a dual monarchy.
So Saudi Arabia didn't exist yet.
Not yet. It wasn't until September 23, 1932, that he formally merged the two realms and declared the unified kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But before he could even get to that point, he had to face the terrible consequences of his own creation.
Meaning the Ikhwan.
Yes. This is the classic Frankenstein's monster moment of his story. The Ikhwan were built for one thing: holy war, for jihad. In their worldview, anyone who wasn't a strict Wahhabi Muslim was an infidel, a kafir, who deserved to be attacked and converted or killed.
Which was a very useful belief when they were attacking Ibn Saud's enemies inside Arabia.
Exactly. But now the conquests are basically over. Ibn Saud is trying to be a statesman. He's signing treaties with the British. He's drawing official borders with the new states of Iraq and Transjordan.
And the Ikhwan don't care about borders.
To them, a border on a map is a blasphemy. They look across into Iraq and Jordan and say, the people on the other side are Shia infidels. God wants us to raid them. They don't care about some line on a map drawn by a British diplomat.
So they start launching raids across these new international borders into British protected territories.
They do. They raid into Iraq, they massacre civilians, and the British are absolutely furious. They have the Royal Air Force there. They tell Ibn Saud, control your men or we will bomb them back to the Stone Age.
So Ibn Saud is stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Completely stuck. He tries to reason with the Ikhwan leaders, men like Faisal al-Dawash and Sultan bin Bajad. He tries diplomacy, but they turn on him. They call him a traitor. They accuse him of going soft, of bowing to the Christian British infidels.
So it's leading to a civil war?
It is the ultimate test of his rule. He has to make a choice. Is he a tribal raider leading a religious movement? Or is he the head of a state? He has to choose between the religious zealots who built his throne and the stability and future of the state itself.
And he chooses the state.
He chooses the state. In 1929, at the Battle of Sabilla, he rides out with his loyalists, and this time he brings modern weapons that the British had supplied him. He brings machine guns.
Against his own brotherhood. Against the men who conquered the kingdom for him.
It was a slaughter. The Ikhwan cavalry charged with their swords and rifles just like they always had, and Ibn Saud's machine gunners just mowed them down. It was brutal, and it must have been incredibly personal. These were men he had fought alongside for decades.
But it sent a message.
It sent the clearest possible message to the entire world. Saudi Arabia is not a rogue religious movement anymore. It is a country. It has borders, and it will respect them. The days of endless jihad are over.
That really does feel like the moment the kingdom became real. It wasn't just a personal conquest anymore. It was a functioning government with rule.
Precisely. And that brings us right to the geopolitical tightrope he had to walk. Because you can't survive, let alone build a nation in the Middle East in the early 20th century without dealing with the dominant power in the region, the British Empire.
The British seem to be everywhere in this story, pulling the strings behind the scenes. But Ibn Saud seems to play them differently than other local leaders did. He's never really their puppet.
No, he's far too clever for that. He's always very transactional with them. You can see it in the Treaty of Darien, which he signed back in 1915.
What was the deal there?
It was a classic protectorate agreement. He agrees to make his lands a British protectorate, meaning he won't deal with any other foreign power without their consent. In exchange, they give him a subsidy of £5,000 a month, and more importantly, a shipment of modern rifles.
£5,000 a month. That's a huge amount of money back then. So he's essentially on the British payroll.
He is, but listen to how he justified it. He essentially said, I'll take their gold and I'll take their guns to fight my enemies, but I will never ever give them my soul or my land. He used the British to help him finally defeat the Rashidis, who were backed by Britain's enemy, the Ottomans. But he always kept them at arm's length.
He never let them get too close.
Never. He refused to let them station troops in his capital. He refused to let them run his administration like they did in Egypt or Iraq. He took the money, but he kept his sovereignty.
And as soon as he becomes strong enough, he renegotiates the entire deal.
Right. By 1927, he's conquered the Hejaz. He controls Mecca and Medina. He's the most powerful man in Arabia. He doesn't need their protection anymore, so he signs the Treaty of Jeddah. And in that treaty, Britain formally recognizes his complete and total independence. No more protectorate. He is a sovereign king on the world stage.
Okay, fast forward to World War II. And this is the part of the story that just blew my mind when I was reading the notes. Saudi Arabia is officially neutral, but there's this bizarre story about a German diplomat.
Fritz Graube, a fascinating character. He was the Nazi ambassador to Iraq. When the British cracked down on a pro-German government in Iraq in 1941, Graube had to flee for his life.
Where does he go?
He runs to Ibn Saud, and Ibn Saud gives him refuge. He hides him.
Wait a second. This is in the middle of World War II. The British are his main allies. They're fighting a life-or-death struggle against Nazi Germany. And Ibn Saud is sheltering a Nazi ambassador. That seems incredibly reckless. Why would he poke the bear like that?
It was a calculated risk. It was his way of signaling to the British and to the world, I am not your colonial subject. I am the master in my own house. I make my own decisions about who enters my tent. It showed that streak of fierce independence. He was always hedging his bets, making sure no single foreign power ever thought they owned him.
But as the war comes to an end, it's clear the British influence is fading. And a new player is entering the chat, the United States.
Yes, and this all culminates in one of the most famous and consequential meetings in modern history, February 14th, 1945, aboard the USS Quincy.
You really have to visualize this scene. It's so improbable. You have an American heavy cruiser, a symbol of modern military power, anchored in the Great Bitter Lake of the Suez Canal.
And on the deck, the American sailors have set up a traditional Bedouin tent, complete with Persian carpets and cushions, because the king refused to sleep in a cramped cabin below deck.
And on one side, you have FDR.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's visibly ailing at this point, exhausted from the Yalta Conference, just months away from his own death, sitting in his wheelchair, the leader of the free world.
And on the other, striding onto the deck, is Ibn Saud, this towering, scarred desert warrior, dressed in his traditional robes, a man who built a kingdom with a sword.
They could not be more different. A New York aristocrat who grew up with immense privilege and a Bedouin king who grew up a refugee in the desert.
And yet they clicked.
Instantly. By all accounts, there was a real, genuine chemistry between them. They smoked together. Ibn Saud was a heavy smoker, they joked. FDR, with his famous charm, treated Ibn Saud not as a curiosity, but as an equal.
And he gave him that famous gift.
He did. He gave Ibn Saud one of his spare wheelchairs as a gift, because the king had severe arthritis and had trouble walking. And Ibn Saud, in return, gave him a diamond-crusted sword.
Now contrast that meeting with his meeting with Winston Churchill just a few days later.
Oh, the Churchill meeting was a complete disaster. It was a clash of cultures. Churchill tried to smoke a cigar and drink brandy in front of the king, which was deeply offensive to his strict Wahhabi values. Churchill lectured him about British imperial interests. It was formal and cold.
Whereas FDR asked for his advice.
Exactly. FDR treated him like a wise elder statesman. And that chemistry, that respect, it mattered enormously. It fundamentally shifted the entire center of gravity of the Middle East.
Because Ibn Saud made a choice?
He made a strategic decision right then and there. The future wasn't with the old declining British Empire. It was with the Americans. They were far away, they didn't have a history of colonialism in the region, and they just wanted to do business. And the business, of course, was oil.
We've danced around the oil, but we need to set the context here. Before oil, Saudi Arabia was poor. Not just, not rich, like truly deeply poor.
Destitute is the word. Their entire national economy was based on three things: dates, camel livestock, and the fees from the annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. That was it.
And if the pilgrims didn't show up?
The country starved, which is exactly what happened during the Great Depression and World War II.
Yeah.
The pilgrimage traffic dried up, and the state was literally bankrupt.
So when American geologists from Standard Oil of California, what we now call Chevron, started digging around in 1933, it was a massive lifeline.
A desperate one. And for years, they found nothing. It looked like a total bust. But they finally struck commercial quantities of oil in 1938 at Damam Well No. 7. And that discovery changed the DNA of the country forever.
It went from a subsistence economy to a petrostate almost overnight.
Almost. And by 1947, Ibn Saud had made it explicit. He told an American diplomat that he preferred American investment and loans over anyone else, over any international agency. He saw the U.S. as a straightforward business partner, not a colonial overlord. And that partnership would define the next 80 years.
I want to pivot away from the maps and the oil concessions for a minute and talk more about the man himself. We keep calling him the Desert King, but what was he actually like to be around?
Physically, as we said, he was overwhelming. Over 6 feet tall, which was gigantic for that time and place. He had this booming voice and apparently an incredibly magnetic personality, very charming when he wanted to be.
But his body was a map of his own history.
Completely. Covered in scars from dozens of battles, bullet wounds, sword slashes. And you mentioned his eye earlier.
Yeah, that he had poor sight in one eye.
Yes. Reports from the 1920s describe a white film over one of his eyes. And the cause is just chilling. It wasn't a battle wound.
It's poison.
It was a poisoning attempt, supposedly by one of his wives back in 1924.
Great.
He survived, obviously, but it left its mark. A constant reminder that his enemies weren't just on the battlefield.
That brings up his family life, which is, it's complex, to put it mildly.
That's one way to put it. The numbers are staggering. He had 22 official consorts over his lifetime and fathered at least 45 sons who survived to adulthood. But we have to look at this through the lens of tribal politics, not modern romance.
Every marriage was a treaty.
Every single one was the strategic alliance. He married the daughter of the powerful Suderi chief to lock down that clan's loyalty. He married into the Shamari tribe, his old enemies, to neutralize them. He literally knit the disparate tribes of the kingdom together through the bonds of marriage.
And the legacy of that strategy is still running the country today.
Literally, every single king of Saudi Arabia since his death, Saud, Faisal, Khalid, Fahd, Abdullah, and the current king, Salman, they are all his direct sons. We are, as of today, still living in the era of the children of Ibn Saud.
But for all this immense power and wealth that came later, there are all these stories of his extreme personal generosity. It's like he never forgot what it felt like to be hungry in the desert.
He really didn't. In Riyadh, he established the Thulaim Guest House. It was basically a massive royal soup kitchen that fed thousands of poor people every single day. Huge vats of rice, meat, and porridge. Anyone who was hungry could go there and eat.
And there's that famous story about his cloak.
It's a great anecdote. He was out in the desert and saw an old man shivering in rags. Without a second thought, Ibn Saud took off his own expensive cloak, draped it over the man, and gave him a handful of gold coins from his purse.
He had a quote about the oil wealth, didn't he? Something about sharing it.
He did. He said, "I haven't obtained all this wealth by myself. God has bestowed it upon me, and all of you have a share in it." At least initially, he really did view the oil money as God's provision to feed and care for his people.
But we have to talk about the contradictions. Because he was a man of massive, glaring contradictions, we can't ignore the darker side of his rule. For example, he's meeting with FDR, the leader of the free world, but he travels to that meeting with enslaved people in his entourage.
That is the starkest and most difficult contradiction for us to understand. Slavery was a deeply ingrained part of the social fabric of Arabia at the time. Ibn Saud regulated it in 1936, trying to improve conditions and limit the trade, but he didn't abolish it.
Why not?
He either couldn't because it would have caused a massive social upheaval, or he wouldn't because he was still a man of his time and place. It wasn't formally abolished until 1967 by his son King Faisal. It just shows you that while he was a modernizer in some ways, he was still deeply, deeply traditional in others.
And yet, speaking of modernizing, he pushed for technology that his own advisors thought was completely insane. The railway.
The Daman to Riyadh Railway, a true passion project for him. His advisors called it an old man's folly. They said, "Your Majesty, why do we need a train across the desert? It's a waste of money." But Ibn Saud was stubborn. He saw the bigger picture.
He knew it would unite the kingdom.
Right. It would move goods, it would move troops, it would connect the oil-rich coast to his capital in the heartland. So he used the first oil royalties to pay for it, cash down. He understood that a modern nation needs infrastructure. You can't run a kingdom on camelback forever.
And he also had some surprisingly, progressive views for his time and place on women.
He did. He famously told the British explorer St. John Philby, "It is permissible for women to read." Now, to our modern ears, that sounds like the barest of bare minimums.
Right.
But in the deeply conservative Nejd in the 1930s, that was a radical statement. He believed in education for girls as well as boys, even if the society around him was extremely resistant to the idea.
There's one more complex topic we need to touch on. His view on Zionism and Jewish people. The source material calls it complex, but what does that actually mean on the ground?
It means he held two very different thoughts at the same time. Politically and religiously, he was fiercely and implacably anti-Zionist. He viewed the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine as an absolute catastrophe for the Arab and Muslim world. He used very harsh, very strong religious rhetoric, calling the Zionists enemies of Islam.
But he made a distinction between Zionism as a political movement and Jewish people in general.
It seems so. For example, during the Hebron massacre in 1929, when Arab mobs killed Jews in Palestine, he publicly condemned it. He said it violated the principles of Islam. He had non-Zionist Jewish friends and business associates he spoke of highly. So his anger seems to have been very specifically directed at the political project of creating Israel, though he certainly used the anti-Semitic language and tropes of his time to express it.
As we move into the 1950s, the king is getting old, the oil is flowing, the money is pouring in, but he seems more worried than ever.
He was exhausted. You have to remember, this man had spent 50 years in near constant warfare and political struggle. He'd built the kingdom, but now he had to preserve it. And the new oil wealth was bringing a host of new problems. Corruption, greed, his son spending lavishly. He was worried that the money would rot the soul of the nation, that it would destroy those simple, tough desert values that he cherished.
And on top of all that, he was deeply worried about succession.
Deeply. His eldest and probably favorite son, Turkey, had died tragically back in the flu pandemic of 1919. So his two most senior remaining sons were Saud and Faisal, and they were polar opposites.
Saud was the older one.
Saud was the crown prince. He was charming, personable, very popular, but he wasn't. Well, he wasn't very competent with money or governance. Faisal, the next in line, was brilliant. He was sharp, ascetic, a born diplomat and statesman.
And Ibn Saud knew Faisal was the more capable son, didn't he?
Oh, he knew. There's a famous quote attributed to him, "I only wish I had 3 Faisals." But the tradition of primogeniture, of the eldest son inheriting, was strong. He couldn't skip over Saud to appoint Faisal without risking a massive family feud, maybe even a civil war. So he kept Saud as crown prince.
And what were his last words to them?
His final advice to his sons was simple. You are brothers. Unite. He absolutely knew, that if they fought amongst themselves, the kingdom he had spent his entire life building would crumble into dust.
On November 9th, 1953, the old desert king passes away.
He died of a heart attack at his palace in Taif. And here's the final poetic and telling detail of his life. At the time of his death, he was one of the richest men in the world. He controlled a literal sea of oil. But in accordance with his strict Wahhabi faith, which forbids the idolization of the dead or building monuments, he was buried in an unmarked grave.
Just a simple mound of dirt in the Al-Aud cemetery in Riyadh.
Right next to his sister, Nora. No headstone, no mausoleum. The founder of a kingdom, buried like any other man.
Wow. Okay, so let's zoom out. We've covered a huge amount of ground here, from that desperate raid to the meeting on the USS Quincy. What is the big takeaway? Why does Ibn Saud's story still matter so much to someone listening today?
I think it matters because his story is the DNA of the modern Middle East. Ibn Saud did something that was thought to be impossible. He took a region of disparate, warring tribes, people who had no concept of a nation-state, and he welded them by force and by faith into a unified country.
He bridged centuries in a single lifetime.
He literally bridged the gap between the 12th century and the 20th century. But, and this is the crucial part, he did it by creating this fundamental built-in tension.
The tension between tradition and modernity.
Exactly. He built the state using the most extreme, fervent religious zeal, the Ikhwan. But he sustained and secured that state using the most pragmatic modern tools, oil politics and treaties with the West. He had to crush the zealots when they threatened the state. But the state itself is still founded on that unique religious identity.
So the tension we see in the region today, this constant push and pull between radical modernization and extreme religious tradition, that's not new. That was baked in from the very beginning by the founder himself.
It is the fundamental paradox of the Saudi state. Ibn Saud somehow managed to personally balance on that tightrope for 50 years. His sons and grandsons are still walking on that same tightrope today.
And that leads to a final thought for you to chew on. Ibn Saud created a nation by first unleashing and then taming religious fanaticism for the sake of state stability. How does a nation founded on such a contradiction navigate the future? That tension he created is his most enduring and perhaps most challenging legacy. The image of that old lion sitting in his palace making men for his nation, that's going to stick with me.
A powerful legacy indeed.